Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. Today we are talking about police corruption. A loyal and longtime viewer of the channel, Infinite Canadian, asked in a recent video why cops would tamper with evidence. You know, we were talking about the Gary Wayne Sutton case. He is, in my opinion, an innocent man who is on death row and he's facing execution, and that's kind of a scary thing. But one of the things that we were discussing in the case is that it seems like the officers involved tampered with the evidence. There were a couple of shotgun shells retrieved from a scene, and they were placed perfectly side by side, almost like they were lined up with a grid or something, you know? And that seems highly unlikely. Well, it is highly unlikely. It's not it seems. It's unlikely. Shells don't just land like that when they're ejected from a gun. But Infinite Canadian wanted to know, why would officers tamper with evidence? And that's what we're getting into. Police corruption is not uncommon. Corruption in general is not uncommon. I don't care if we're talking about a religious organization, a political organization, or law enforcement. It happens. And in the United States, we have a long history of it. We can go back to the 90s and talk about the Rampart scandal. That was a pretty crazy one. We had community resource officers who were basically acting like a gang. They had ties to different gangs. They had ties to the Bloods. They had ties to Death Row Records. It was even speculated they had something to do with the murder of Notorious B.I.G. There's all sorts of stuff on the Rampart scandal. I'm looking at some of the info right here. These officers, this took place in L.A. They were tied to robberies, a bank robbery, shootouts, beatings, extortions, framing people, and they just had a culture of misconduct. It's crazy, but it happened, and how they had ties to the Bloods and Death Row Records and stuff like that. And there were a whole bunch of officers that ended up getting indicted. Some of them got off. Some of them ended up, getting convicted. But the Rampart scandal wasn't the only scandal of its kind. You also had the Dirty 30, which was an NYPD police corruption scandal, and it took place in the 90s as well. The Rampart scandal took place, from the early 90s into the early 2000s. But the Dirty 30, these guys were a bunch of cops that were basically knocking over drug dealers, stealing their drugs, and then selling the drugs from the precinct at half price. Can't make this stuff up. Well, you can make this stuff up, but this happened. A total of 33 officers were arrested in the scandal. So, this sort of thing, it's not uncommon, right? And if you guys are interested in those particular scandals, I think I'm going to do a full video on probably each of those. Maybe I'll just put this into a corruption playlist. But if you're interested in seeing those videos, maybe you should leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't really miss those when they come out, and the algorithm will bring you back here. It's free to subscribe, so yeah. And while I'm on the whole promotional thing, thank you very much to my Patreon patrons, Kenneth Iman and Brian Kitchens, for supporting what I do. Now, getting back to the whole corruption thing. So in this particular instance, in the Gary Wayne Sutton case, where you have officers tampering with evidence, what is their motivation? The theory is that they were involved in some nefarious criminal activities. Someone got a little bit too close to it, and they needed to be silent so they couldn't, report them to, the authorities that be and end up getting them investigated. I don't think police officers probably want to be investigated when they're dirty, just like any crook doesn't want the heat on them. If you're doing dirt, you really don't want people looking over your shoulder. So let's say these officers are involved in some nefarious stuff and someone's getting too close. Well, how hard is it for a cop to kill somebody and then pin it on somebody else? Not very hard. You know, we don't have a lot of accountability sometimes in the United States when it comes to the police or law enforcement in general. There's not a lot of oversight sometimes. There's not a lot of accountability. So it's not hard to get something like that off. If you're dirty, you cover up your tracks, you kill someone, whatever, get them out of the way, and then you just frame someone else for the crime. But to get deeper into why this happens, and this isn't going to be a super long video where I get super in depth and look at everything, but the reason why this sort of thing happens is people are people. I've said it on the channel before. Law enforcement officers and correctional officers and anybody else, I mean, people are people, right? You have good people and you have bad people. And the same is true for people who go to prison. A lot of folks who are in prison aren't in prison because they are career criminals. A lot of people are in prison because they had one fuck up and they go and they do their time and then they get out and they try to put their life together, right? That's all a lot of people who are in prison. That's all they want to do, is they want to make things right and get a new start and get their life on the right track. But on the other hand, there are bad people out there, and not all bad people just walk around with a label saying that, you know, I'm a bad guy. You have bad people in all walks of life. You have bad people that are involved in politics. You have bad people that are involved in law enforcement. You have bad people that are involved with religious organizations. You name it. People are people. So you're going to have good and bad everywhere, right? And sometimes you will have a organization where the prevalent culture is one of corruption. You know, you'll have a culture where the bad aspects of human nature are encouraged. It prevails. No organization, whether it's a political organization, a religious organization, a law enforcement organization, whatever, no organization is better than the people it is made up of. So if you have a organization that is made up of a bunch of bad apples, the organization is going to reflect that. If you have a law enforcement community, whether it's a local sheriff's office, you know, a precinct, whatever, if you have a group of guys that are mostly bad dudes, that organization is going to suffer. That's just how it works out. I will also say that I don't think anyone really sets off by saying, hey, you know what? I'm just going to be a bad guy. Maybe that happens. Actually, it probably does happen. Very few people just go off and say, hey, I'm going to be a bad guy. We'll put it that way, because there's probably a handful of guys that say, hey, yeah, I want to be a bad guy. But I don't think that's the norm. I think what happens is you might allow your morals and standards, your principles to slip here or slip there, but you get on a slippery slope. You get desensitized. You know, the more you do something, the less it's going to offend your sensibilities. You get accustomed to it. And it's pretty easy for that to happen in a small town. Gary's case happened in a small town, in kind of a rural area, right? From what I understand, and I'm going to have him on the channel pretty soon. I'm doing an interview with him, I think, Monday. I was supposed to talk to him on the phone today, but something was going on with his unit team, and I couldn't get him on the phone. But from what I understand, his case took place out in the middle of nowhere, right? in a small town, and I know about this because I've grown up in a county that has like 7,000 people, you know. Law enforcement in areas like this, for one, they don't have a lot of officers. Sometimes they'll have maybe 4 sheriff's officers that work for the sheriff's office. You know, that's how many deputies, that's how many people they have on hand, right? So there's not a lot of folks there. But if you've been in the area for a while, chances are you know the people who work at the sheriff's office. You know the people who work for the local police department if you do live in town. And if you don't know them personally, chances are you went to school with one of their kids, maybe they went to school with one of your kids, or you're connected somehow. Someone knows you, or you know their family, or they know your family. There's some sort of connection there. It's easy to make a deal with somebody when you don't feel like you're making a deal with the devil. You know, you're making a deal with someone that you've lived down the street from for 5, 10 years, 20 years. And it's easy to get on that slippery slope. It's easy to allow your morals and your integrity to become compromised. You hear about these corruption scandals in the cities, but for real, it goes on out in the middle of nowhere too. We actually have criminal organizations out here. We have theft rings and all sorts of stuff that goes on. And you just don't hear much about it because we don't have a big news agency. And for real, we don't have a bunch of the big busts that you'll see in the cities because they don't have the law enforcement resources out here. It's kind of still like that Wild West vibe a little bit. Just because they don't have the resources. People can get away with a lot. Anyway, I'm going to keep this video somewhat short. If you're interested in seeing those videos on corruption, make sure you like, subscribe. It's free. And I will see you around. I'm sorry I haven't been posting a lot lately. I actually had an infection in this eye, and I was wearing an eye patch for a little bit. I seem to be feeling a lot better, and I hope my eye continues to get better. But that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for being a part of the channel. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will see you all later. Right,